Hello, world. My name is Alana. I've been with Danielle over here, talking to Marcus once a week for about 2 months. And today we're going to be discussing the M400 and David Bowie. We've touched on a lot of things in the last episodes, and we're starting to really get into a groove. So we're here at the Mellotron House in Los Angeles, where we have large photos of David Bowie that we bring to NAMM, and we also have an M400. It doesn't. We're not going to play the M400 today, but you are welcome to ask questions and we will discuss. But for the time being, we're going to focus on just kind of catching up a little bit with Marcus, who is in Stockholm. So we will welcome Marcus via Skype.
Hello.
Right. Yay. Yeah, you're live.
Hey.
All
Hello.
right. Awesome.
Is our speaker on? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing fine. Yeah. So the broadcast now that we're using a different tool, the broadcast is what I see of you is slightly more pixelized than it usually is. But
Okay.
I hope the audio is good.
I do too.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. Okay. Our meters look good, so hopefully we're getting good stuff on the other side too. How's Stockholm?
Yeah, the
lately?
audio sounds really good actually. The when the video is this bad, normally the audio normally is bad. So, but this is working a lot better now. So that's great.
Awesome. Yay. It's great to see you. How has Stockholm been?
Stockholm's been great. It's been really it's been fantastic weather here for the last few days, and it's just still now, even though it's shortly past 9, it's still very sunny and rather warm. Actually, I have all my windows open here, so it's super nice actually.
That sounds
So
lovely.
yeah, so that's pretty great actually. So it's this time of year when all the schools stop also. So I mean it's like graduation time basically. There's been a lot of there's a lot of activity in the morning and in the middle of the day, and it's great that the graduates get like a nice final day, so to say. And there's been a lot of talk about restricting that here, but I find it completely silly because we have the whole COVID situation kind of really pretty good under control here.
Yeah.
At least definitely concerning the younger people, and with a little bit of sensible thinking, one should have been able to do we call it running out, because it's become a tradition for the students to run out from the school and like the final
that's
thing.
Sweet.
And this,
I said that's sweet. I like that. I wish we did that in America.
Yeah, it's like, and it's been a lot of tears, of course, for the last several months because this was supposedly forbidden, but it's for the last 3 weeks it's been obvious that that it's pretty idiotic not to do it. But now it just seems like a matter of principle that they're still keeping that ban in place.
I'm glad that Stockholm's been so safe. Been a very safe place to be. That's really nice.
Yeah, the big exception for us has been like the elderly care homes. That's where it hasn't worked well at all in Stockholm, and that's why our statistics are pretty bad in that sense. But as far as normal life is concerned, it's been really good, because we've been able to carry on almost without disruption, except for like maybe a couple of weeks when it was the most panic-ridden and nobody really knew what the heck was going on basically.
Yeah.
So
everything with I know we caught up about a week ago with manufacturing, but things are still pretty normal for Mellotron.
Yeah. It's there's been some bumps here and there. I mean, some stuff from the United States was delayed, and there's been stuff that was delayed from China and so forth. And there's still a little bit of extra work to get stuff anywhere, so to say, to get stuff here, so to say. But to send stuff out, because I use FedEx, they are pretty. That works pretty well, especially to the United States. So
that's great.
That's been working actually through the whole situation. It's been working really awesome.
We had a couple people post very happy recipients of instruments earlier today, so that's really nice.
Oh, great.
Yeah. I think I reposted, but
yeah, and FedEx really have been flying the flag, so to say. They've been really, keeping it up for the whole time. There's some minor things, but overall, just it's been working great. So we've been able to continue the way, the normal way, and all my employees have been able to work normally. So that's pretty great, actually.
Praise be, as the God-fearing say. Praise be. Yeah. Truly, though, it is really awesome to be able to maintain consistent employment for your employees. So that's really awesome. So why don't we jump into the M400? I know you and we were without Danielle last week, and our foray into the 400 was actually a lot of Mark II because of, that's why the 400 came to be, was because of a lot of issues that the Mark II presented for artists, especially touring artists. So do you want to introduce us to the M400 and why we're focusing on it and David Bowie?
Yeah, it's basically a little recap that the Mark II Mellotron, which was the first Mellotron, basically was a behemoth of 350 pounds or something like that, with a bunch of 3 motors and speakers and mechanisms and a bunch of stuff that wasn't holding up very well on tour. Then they made an instrument that was slightly smaller, the 300 Mellotron, but that still had a lot of trouble. And then they realized that they had to bring out something that was really portable compared to these other instruments. And so they came up with a 400, which basically looks like a little harmonium, or what you want to call it, on the outside at least. It's a little white harmonium looking thing.
Cute.
And on the inside, of course, it's your, for a Mellotron, usual tape replay mechanism, which is, of course, even back then was a very rare way of making a keyboard instrument. As we will see later, there was also an instrument called the Chamberlain that actually preceded the Mellotron that also had tapes inside, but very few had that instrument on tour. The original Chamberlain actually was even more troublesome than the Mark II. Oh. They looked the same, but the Chamberlain Music Master was even more unreliable, so to say. So Chamberlain made a more portable version, which we'll dig into later, and then also Mellotron at approximately the same time, actually, which is around 70, 71, made a more portable instrument. Now, the genius thing with the 400 Mellotron is that you can change sound, as you would say today, banks, or we would say tape frames, because that's what it actually is inside of an M400 Mellotron. And the tape frame has 35 tapes lined up with 3 sounds on each tape. So you had cello, violins, and flute, for example, on a tape frame. And the genius thing with the 400 is that you can actually take the keyboard off. You can take the whole thing apart without having any tools. You can change out the tape frame for a different one. So that's, of course, very convenient.
Without having any tools. I didn't realize that. Without having any tools.
Oh, yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. Don't have to have any tools. That was, of course, extremely convenient for musicians or studios. I mean, if you want to make a horror movie soundtrack, you might want a bunch of choir sounds. And then if you want to do some lush string arrangements and brass arrangements, you might want to get a bunch of brass or string tape frames. So you could basically adapt your library, as it is, which is, we would call it today, a sample library. You could expand that as you need, at your needs. There was, for instance, John Keating was, how shall I say, avant-garde maybe composer. It was fairly well known in England. He put out some records and stuff. And he had 3 tape frames, 9 sounds commissioned that consisted of mostly percussive instruments. There was one sound that was started with timpani rolls and then went up 3 octaves to what sounds like a piccolo bongo, or what you want to call it, a very, very small drum, so to say. So, and then he did another, so to say, sound, as we call them, which is 35 individual samples that had a gong that was dipped into water, for instance. And as you can imagine, this is something you would prefer not to have to do every time you want that particular sound. It would be much more convenient to just pull out your tape frame, put it in, and then you have because what happens when you dip a gong in water is that it goes down in frequency.
Wow.
So and then a bunch of other percussive effects. He also recorded a celeste, which we call the 74 celeste, and it's on, I think it's on the 01 card. I think it's built into our digital instruments. Okay. It's a very full-bodied it's celeste, actually. God,
and so these are, you're talking about
again?
I'm sorry?
Celeste?
Yes, Celeste. Yes.
Celeste, exactly. Thank you. Okay, what were you asking?
That you're talking about the M400 or the M1?
No, the M400.
That's
this
what.
is
Okay,
all
just clarifying. So
dig
all of
into
this
the
is
M1 later when we see some footage of that.
Okay.
And then, yeah, basically it's so you could basically use it as the mellotron as a sampler. Of course, it was a rather complicated process because you had to record the sounds and then you have to send them to the mellotron company, and they had to make a master tape and then put it on a tape frame. But in principle, it's like sampling, so to say. Tangerine Dream also did that. They had 8 custom sounds, and we have all of them on the expansion card. That's mostly sound effects, but some of them were from a library, and some sound effects were stuff that they had recorded themselves, and even some special synth sounds that they had used on some records that were basically very tricky to recreate, or just sounds in general. Right. One sound is, for instance, used on Rubicon. It is a piano, a backwards piano played through a Benson Echo Rec, and you can't really recreate that live. How would you?
We heard that sound a few episodes ago, correct?
Exactly.
Amazing. Yeah, if anybody's curious to check that out, it's on our Twitch highlights, twitch.tv/Mellotron Factory, and the Tangerine Dream Rubicon highlight has us discussing that sound on it. We are live on YouTube and on Instagram TV today. I'm sorry, Instagram Live, not Instagram TV. So just as a reminder, if anybody's tuning in on Instagram, you will get the full production effect by viewing on YouTube or on Twitch. Anyway, sorry to interrupt you, Marcus.
Yeah.
I totally lost track of where we just were.
Exactly. So basically, when the 400 came out, it was used by everybody from Bowie, as we will see, and Led Zeppelin. Of course, all the usual prog suspects like Genesis and Yes and King Crimson, they used it live, and just on and on. You know, Black Sabbath used it later in the 70s. They actually used the Mark II there's a photo from, I think, the Hollywood Bowl with the Mark II, actually, which is kind of interesting. That was around about 70, 71. Then for the later tours in the late 70s, they used the 400, where they also had a custom tape frame made with some custom sounds on it, which we also have on the expansion card, of course. Then, I mean, there were just tons and tons of bands that were using it live. It was just the go-to instrument back then to have something portable and reliable that for live use. The other maybe not intended benefit of the 400's ability to be taken apart easily, so to say, that little feature is of course very handy if you're on tour and somebody pours a beer in your instrument, or something else happens to your instrument. You can literally get all the parts out within half a minute, so to say.
I never would have thought of that.
Yeah.
That's really good.
So I would say of all of this, I'm not saying the 400 is the most reliable 70s keyboard, but I would definitely say it's the one that's that's the most easy to take apart, actually, of all 70s keyboard instruments. Now probably somebody's gonna correct us on that on some feedback.
Yeah, I'm curious.
So that would be interesting to hear what
We'll
that
see
would
if
be. But
anything-
it's definitely. We should next time, since we're talking so much about it, and since there were some technical issues here in setting up, I didn't have time to pull out the 400. We should actually do that next time and just pull it out and just take it apart, basically.
It's very, that would be fun for sure. Yeah, we'll do an episode where we take apart the M400.
Yeah, exactly. And there's one big thing talking about all the benefits of the 400. The Mellotron company did what I firmly believe is their fatal mistake with the 400, and that was the motor control card. So all the horror stories that roadies and musicians tell from the 70s about the Mellotron having to be adjusted the whole time, and there's also talk about head adjustments and whatnot adjustments. Most of the problems are due to a very badly designed motor control board that about 75% of all the 400s that they did had this card. The first 100 had a card that was actually inherited from the 300, and that card worked pretty well. The pitch control it didn't have a wide sweep, but it was fairly stable and worked well. Then there came a motor control board that most of the 400s had. Many of them have been changed out. And that motor control board basically turned your instrument into a duophonic instrument.
Oh, cool.
Of course, the Mellotron is fully polyphonic, normally. But this motor card, as soon as you started taking chords that were more than 2-3 keys, the whole thing would sag. And
Why
that's,
is
of course,
that?
It's just badly designed. The control card just didn't work well. The motor, a DC motor it's hard to make a DC motor run exactly in the same speed. So you have to have some sort of electronic that does this. And if the electronic works badly, it won't be in tune, basically.
Yeah.
So there's two main issues that you need to, with a design like that. It has to be stable under load, which was what I was just explaining when you were pressing chords. And the other thing, it has to be stable over time and temperature, which was the other thing that the thing sucked at. It was really horrible over time. So John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin, I told this story before. If somebody's been watching all of our episodes, he will recognize this little anecdote. But John Paul Jones said it was like landing an airplane when they played Stairway to Heaven, because Jimmy Page would, of course, on the double neck, he would start to play the intro, and then John Paul Jones was going to come in with a Mellotron flute, and he couldn't tell before he started playing, of course, if the thing was in tune or not. So he would be like landing
on
an airplane,
stage, like
because,
live.
of course, Jimmy Page was in tune, one can assume, and of course he, or whatever he was, he had to adapt to that. So that's why he was saying it was like landing an airplane. And they definitely had the bad motor card for the 1973 tour, because the better motor card, which came later, came out in 74, not earlier than 74.
Okay.
So that was a nightmare, because you would tune the thing before the show or whatever at sound check, forget about that. If like half an hour and an hour later, it was all out of tune again, and the thing would go out of tune just because of the general instability, not necessarily because of heat problems or something. That was another issue.
Right.
But so that gave because the Mellotron, I believe, had a pretty good reputation from the Mark II, at least from staying in tune, etc., etc. But that sort of ruined the reputation. And I think that the company's problems during the 70s, that they never recovered from that. One person that was definitely very annoyed by it who was also touring with a bad motor card, was of course Rick Wakeman with, he also had 2 Mellotrons on stage, which is of course double trouble. So that was probably the reason he initiated the Mark V Mellotron, which is a double 400 basically, that has 1 capstan axle. So at least he would know that once he tuned one keyboard, the other keyboard would also be in tune. So
it's pretty cool, pretty smart.
He actually made his own Mark V keyboard before the Mark V was out by making his own cabinet taller, because Rick Wakeman is a tall guy, and put 2 400 mechanisms in there and basically just connected the 2 capstans so they would, and just used 1 motor, because that's not a problem for the motor to run 2 capstans.
Right.
So because he was still just 1 person, there were not 2 persons playing this, so the instability issues were not that bad, of course, because he was not loading it with 2 pairs of hands. He was just playing either one, but at least he knew that those 2 would be in tune between each other.
Wow. The evolution.
Yeah, and everybody was using it, and everybody was being frustrated with it.
Yeah.
The Genesis actually in their Lamb Lies Down on Broadway tour in '74 had the improved motor card, and you can hear that on a little improvisation piece called the Waiting Room, where he pitches the Mellotron much more than you could pitch it with any other motor control board, so to say.
Oh, that's cool. We did not check that one out in any of our episodes, I don't believe, the Waiting Room song.
No,
Not
no,
yet.
exactly.
We'll
We
have
should
to.
maybe we should check it out when we're doing taking the thing apart, because of course I will have it hooked up, and we could listen to how the good motor control card can be pitched, and then I can demonstrate by just turning the knob a little bit how little the other motor control board actually can be.
Was it an issue of electronics? Like, would it just or was it just not working well? Like,
it was the other thing was that it had the completely wrong principle. Let me see how I can explain this without going into too much technical detail. You can actually run a DC motor. You normally run that with just a varying voltage. With a varying voltage, you will get a lower or higher speed. And some genius at the company, because the company making the Mellotrons was not doing the electronics. They had hired some company to do it. I can see that on the boards that there's some other company names on there. So genius had apparently thought up the idea to run the motor with a pulse instead, and by varying how wide the pulse would be, you can vary how strong the motor is, so to say.
Okay.
But the pulse was an audio frequency, so that's the third thing that's not very common but happens quite a lot on those 400s. You'll have a little tone going in your audio, and then you vary the pitch, so you have a disturbance in your audio. And I have seen cases where this audio that comes from the motor control goes through turns the motor into a speaker. So of course the motor has a winding with copper wire, and if that motor is not perfect, and you put a tone to it, that motor will vibrate, so to say. So to my great surprise, once that I turned a 400 on, I was like, what? It's not even connected. Where is the audio coming from? So it was coming from the motor, depending on how you turn the pitch knob.
And so that's not actually the sound of the Mellotron. That's actually electricity. No. So I have a question.
Yeah, that's the electronic, the motor control electronics sending out a tone to the motor, basically, which is the wrong way to make a motor control board for a musical instrument.
Okay.
But So that's and then the next motor control board has a completely different principle. It works with just a DC voltage. It sends a varying DC voltage to it depending on how you set the pitch, and if and also the DC voltage gets increased if you load the motor. So it just keeps, but it senses the speed, which the other also did, but it senses the speed in a smarter way and adjusts the power of the motor in a smarter way, so to say.
Sounds much more intelligent. I have this
Yep.
I once plugged something into an extension cord, and the way that the plug was, the actual plug going into the extension cord started making a sound, and eventually it actually overheated and like melted part of the extension cable. But I didn't even at the time, I was just like, wow, electronics are so weird. But now there is an intersection between just electricity and sound and power, clearly.
Yeah. And what you probably heard was the 60 hertz or overtones, 120 hertz or whatever you had from that kind of short circuit or something like that. It probably was, so to say.
That's pretty cool.
So
and dangerous.
Yeah, that's it's basically just electric currents induce magnetic fields, and magnetic fields move cables and things. And that's how a speaker works, basically. So that can turn anything into a speaker. I mean, your old what do you call them? Light tubes, incandescent tubes? No,
fluorescent.
What's the name of those?
Fluorescent light bulbs.
Fluorescent tubes, exactly. Mm-hmm. They have a little they call it in Sweden a reactor inside, and that's a little choke, basically a coil, and that will hum in some cases. So
I've heard fluorescent hums a lot in my life. I mean, that's like what public school sounds like in America, is just the hum of fluorescent tubes. I'm so glad to not be surrounded by that. Wow. Okay.
And that if you would measure it, it will be 60 hertz and overtones of that. What you will be hearing is probably 120 and 240 hertz. Of those overtones. And if you have a musical ear, you will notice that in the United States, of course, the hum is slightly higher than in Europe, because in Europe it would be 50, 100, 200 hertz, those noises. Yes, a little excursion into electricity and electrodynamics, etc.
Cool.
We can have a little lecture on that also, I'm sure.
So things just kept improving with the M400, and electricity was part of that. Yeah.
Exactly. That motor control board made a world of a difference, but the reputation for the Mellotron was actually shot, and they made people quite pissed off actually also, because this motor control board they were selling that as a kit for $350 in the mid 70s actually, and you spent like $3-4 grand on a Mellotron, and then it didn't work, and then you were supposed to spend another $300-400 to get it fixed, basically. And a lot of people were kind of pissed off, because Rick Wakeman famously torched some of his 400 in a field, and
wow.
So. Yeah, and I attribute the speed of the bands chucking out their 400s and replacing it with string machines that were not even close in sound to a Mellotron. I attribute that to the frustration that they had with this motor, basically with how badly those 400s were working. Because once you had a good motor control board in the 400, it worked really well actually, and that was one of our first. How I got involved in the project with Dave Keane, because he when he bought the rest of the company and the what do you call it, the bankruptcy remnants, so to say, he in 1990 he got the tapes and all of that, of course, but also certain spare parts, and he sold out those replacement board kits in no time. And that's when I coincidentally contacted him, and I was working on my own version of this board, and that's that was the initial way of how him and I started working together, and we've sold hundreds of those boards over the years.
Oh, that's amazing.
Because every 400 needs one that hasn't got one, basically.
Right. So you just like sort of been repairing that issue intermittently as it comes up when people come to you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
There's continually people coming up and having issues digging out old 400s, and it's impossible to get them to work properly, no matter how much you work you spend on it, and that's usually the bad motor card.
Yeah.
So we wanted to check out David Bowie. There's some pictures in the back. Actually, those two pictures are two of the ones that are from this Mick Rock book of really wonderful Bowie photographs, and they're coincidentally, I had just picked out those two that you have on the back. Exactly, those two. And
yeah, we have a third. I'm actually going to scooch it.
What did you say?
She's grabbing the third.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah, that's another one. Put it on the floor there. I don't know how well you exactly. Thanks, Danielle. Don't trip it.
Wow. I ruined everything just now. Here, you want to keep doing the broadcast and I'll fix all of that I broke?
What happened?
The mic stand hit everything.
Oh, okay. Hey, no,
sorry, we're back. Hey,
Hey.
how's it going?
Yeah. Now the video just keeps getting worse and worse here. I hope you're seeing something.
There you are.
I was just saying the video keeps getting worse and worse. Doesn't matter to me. I know how the place looks, but I hope our viewers can see something. It's extremely pixelized in my end. So I could show you some of this book here, but I'm not sure how it will look because.
Okay. Let's try it.
Yeah. So.
It looks good. It looks great.
Yeah, okay. So you basically have here this photo, which is with the Mellotron in the foreground here, with Bowie and Mick Ronson in the background. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Looks great.
I love it.
Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah,
that one,
that's
you never
probably
blew up that one with the... Oh, it is blown up. We just don't have it behind us. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Exactly.
So these are at
precisely,
NAMM. If anybody comes to NAMM, you'll be able to see these blown up.
Exactly. And there is actually one, there are, and the interesting thing is, of course, this is the Ziggy tour, and he only used it for one Ziggy tour. The last, the last one he did in '73, and that is, that's when he had the Mike Garson on keyboards and so forth, and you can actually see. I was looking intensely for more video footage of him, of live footage, and it's very hard to find. I will show you in a moment here, but you can actually see if the drummer has just a plain kick drum with nothing on it, the Mellotron won't be in it. If it says spiders on the kick drum, that's that final tour when he had the Mellotron. Okay. So it's extremely difficult to find any kind of video footage of with the Mellotron in it.
If anybody has any, send it our way.
Yes,
you never know.
I'm just trying to find the final. There is one more photo of him with a Mellotron. It is it's actually one that we haven't been using in at NAMM. Oh, here's one that I hadn't seen before actually. To your right, between some fans. Oh,
just barely visible. Yeah. So below the Aladdin Saint
heads,
symbol,
so to say, between the hair, I actually hadn't
Yeah.
seen that one before. I hadn't noticed that one actually.
Cool.
So that's another shot. So there's one shot. Oh yeah, here. That's the shot we've never used at now. To his
that one's
right, you
fantastic.
can see a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's his dress is of course the most interesting, so to say, eye-catching thing in this photo. So yeah, what I found is rather pathetic actually as far as video material is concerned. So let us do this share screen thing
Okay.
and start sharing.
I'm just gonna double check on our Instagram.
Are we? Can you see my
Yes.
screen here?
Yes.
Okay, so here that blob is the 400. So see there? Whoop. Of course, that had to happen.
Yeah, we're gonna get an ad, but that's okay.
So, all right. So let me see here. Of course. Yeah, there we go. Here, that's the close-up.
So that's the white.
And
This
I
is the
think
same
there's
tour.
one more shot of this actually.
Oh my gosh, I wish I was there.
It's amazing that there's not more footage like this around.
Yeah.
This is some sort of BBC special about it. Yeah.
Unseen lighting men and sound mixers provide the stage effects. And then, of course, there's Bowie. Tantalizing, mocking, outrageous.
Yeah.
In reality, he's more of a showman than a freak. Hollywood razzmatazz has come to the world of beat.
I don't even know what this guy is talking about. It's some journalist just saying interesting words. He thinks. So here, in a moment, we will see the kick drum. This is pretty interesting. There was quite a mania around him at this time.
Yeah.
That's the. Yeah, there was the kick drum with the spiders. It's in a V shape. Here you go, to the left.
Oh,
the
yes.
spiders. That's that last tour.
He's so young.
He actually had the most extravagant outfits for this tour.
Mm-hmm.
He's also smart enough to realize that in showbiz, the more outrageous you are, the more people will notice you.
Yeah, blah blah. Okay, so that is unfortunately the only stuff that I managed to dig out.
No, that's okay. I mean, that's fantastic. Video in the 70s is not easy to come by. Live concert video. We have some great stills that we can pull up on our end. And I don't know if you got to check out the extra ones that I found, but they're really beautiful. So we'll
The what?
Do you mind? Are you stopping sharing your screen? Yes.
Yeah, I can stop sharing my screen. Boom.
Cool. So we have, can you see what we're showing you? No.
No, I can't.
Okay, cool. Let me show you this way.
There's a bunch of photos out there. Or not a bunch. There are a few photos. I found some photos. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We checked those out last time. Yeah, you found some really good ones from that tour.
Yeah. There's
exactly.
I think there's like 3 new ones. So that we checked out this one last time as well. I love the disco shoes and the angle.
The video quality is a little bit bad here,
Okay.
so in my end. So yeah, I think we saw that one last time. Yeah, with the shoes, with the platform shoes, exactly.
Yeah. And then
Awesome.
this one we also looked at. So this is when he's like sort of leaning on nothing.
Yeah.
And then I believe that my next couple are new. So here he is on one of the monitors with the guitar amp.
Oh, this is I'm seeing the one where he's leaning on nothing at the moment. No,
Okay,
here, yeah.
there we go.
Okay,
Just a
yeah,
little
that's a
bit of
good
his
one. I
aura.
hadn't seen that before. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Mick Ronson there, the guitarist, which was also the arranger. He did a lot of string arrangements for him. They were a fantastic working partnership, actually. It
Like on
was
records
that was
and live, arranging
yeah, yeah,
for.
yeah. Well, he is the partially the genius behind that Ziggy era, and also Hunky Dory and all of that.
So cool.
He's had a big role in that.
Very,
So
very
yeah.
cool. Big fan. Yeah, I love that one a lot. And then I think we have, is that it? Oh, I thought I pulled one more, but
It was the same
Yeah.
one.
No, but I can see that the Mellotron is really visible. So yeah,
Yeah.
so it's kind of we have to sort of it's that tour for Bowie and the 400. The 1984 floor show was something that he did in '73, I think, and this was kind of the last hurrah for the Ziggy character. And there is Mellotron on Space Oddity from that show, but I looked back and forth, and the video material is actually pretty good from that 1984 floor show. But they had the keyboard guy tucked away somewhere in the wings, so no video of
Yeah.
that Mellotron, unfortunately.
yeah.
But then Mr. Bowie, or Mr. Jones, as he was born, he actually went into his Berlin period, as we know. And in Berlin, there was, in that studio, the Hansa studio, there was, strangely enough, a Chamberlain. Some say this was Brian Eno's. Some say this was actually a music master. And I haven't done any extensive research on that. All we know is that he used the M1 for the tours, or tour after Low, for instance. He used on Heroes and Low, he used the Chamberlain sounds on several tracks. And now the Chamberlain Music Master was before the Mellotron Mark II, as we've said several times before, and it was the home organ version of a tape replay instrument. That's where the idea came from, with the home organ, basically, with speakers and the Roomba and cha-cha-cha,
Right.
and all of that on the left-hand side, and and the lead sounds on the right keyboard, so to say. And Harry Chamberlain, as did the Mellotron Company, of course, realized that for a home organ it was way too complicated and way too also expensive and needed too much service, etc., etc. And a home user was not prepared to walk that extra mile, or so to say, spend that extra money keeping such a beast running, basically.
Yeah.
They were perfectly happy with maybe just like a rhythm in a box, electronic
Oh,
rhythm
yeah.
thing,
The little
and
boom
just
boxes.
a home organ, basically.
Yeah.
So, but the big market, which it often boils down to for this kind of instrument, was of course musicians. And so Harry Chamberlain also realized that he had to make something smaller and more portable. So he came up with a completely different tape return mechanism. So instead of springs that require quite a bit of space, which makes a Mellotron is always a floor standing instrument. There's no way of building a Mellotron, that's only this high with
Right.
that kind of mechanism. But Harry Chamberlain came up with a mechanism where it's kind of intricate, but it boils down to the same as a tape measure. But the actual mechanism is not the same as a tape measure, but you can imagine it that kind of way. So the tapes are basically rolled up on little spools that are driven back by another motor. So there's
cool.
two motors in one of those small Chamberlains. So, but with all that extra mechanism, he managed to make it only this high, that mechanism. And so the Chamberlain M1, as it was called, or the M series, was a tabletop instrument. And he made the M1, which had 35 keys. he made the M2 that had 25 plus 35 keys, and then he made some rare M4 and Riviera instruments that the Riviera, the M4 was basically two M2s stacked on top of each other, which is a nightmare. But and then he also made a home organ looking version of this instrument where he had it looked like a home organ with the whole furniture and the whole 9 yards. And he made his own version of that had actually another remote controlled Chamberlin unit in it that you could, with the bass pedals, you could play rhythms.
Like with your feet.
Yeah, and that demands a longer explanation how a Chamberlin remote works. So we will dig into that at some later time. But needless to say, there were only a handful of these big instruments made, but he actually made several hundred. We're estimating about 200 of these M1 Chamberlins. And for Mr. Bowie's tour there in 1978, he of course couldn't lug around a Chamberlin Music Master, so he used a Chamberlin M1, and I'm going to show you this.
Cool.
If technology works.
We love technology.
Here we go. So speed of life. Here we go. So this is now Dallas, 1978. So this is the Chamberlin. So Bowie is playing the Chamberlin himself.
Oh, cool.
And you'll see some shots of this. So he's probably playing some strings or something. There you go.
Oh, I see.
So here you see, this is the Chamberlin. And it's very interesting to see these reinforcements and this steel frame that they've built for it, because with all the experience Mr. Chamberlin had, he built in quite a few mistakes into this design. So it's not very stable, despite that it's kind of small. But you can see here that so what happens if you shift one of these Chamberlins slightly, you will whack it out of adjustment. So that's why they have this steel or aluminum, maybe, since it's for the road, framed built for it. You can see it's got four legs, basically, and then wheels, of course. They wheel it onto the stage only for a couple of songs. And then this X-shaped reinforcement. So
that was wise.
I think it's a brass sound he's using. So that's the classical shape of a Chamberlin. Oh, there's another reinforcement. So you can actually the song before this, I just couldn't find the file, was actually this song.
So that's the M1 sound, the flute.
So here, Bowie again is playing it. I think he's using the flute, the Chamberlin flute. Yeah, there you go. It's going to be in shot in a moment here. Here you see it's from the back. And here, the track selector is over there, and here's the on-off button.
Oh, can you make it a little bigger?
It's only a 3-octave instrument, yes?
Can you make it a little bigger?
Oh, bigger, yeah.
Cool.
Here you see it again. It's quite a good shot of it, and you see all these reinforcements and the legs and whatnot to keep it sort of stable. And I have actually another video of this.
It's beautiful.
Here we go.
Same concert?
No, this is from Musikladen. This is from a German TV show.
Okay. It's very slow beginning. Oh.
Yeah. Here we go. So there you have the Chamberlain, of course.
So like same tour, but not the same performance.
Yeah, it's the same concept. It's not a little, yeah. So the footage here is not as it's not as clear, so to say, with the Chamberlain, but at least there's something. Let me get back to our Skype here thing. Boom, stop sharing.
I love all of those videos. What a time.
Yeah, there's actually the from the Dallas concert, the song before Speed of Life that we listened to is actually that song that we just heard from Musikladen. And the interesting thing is that you can see Bowie. He's only filmed from the front. There's no footage from the back, but you can see that he's crossing his hands like this. He looks really weird where how he's standing. And if you don't know, why would he do something like that? And the reason is he's mixing between the different tracks. So he's playing the chord with his right hand, and with his left hand he's selecting. He's using the track selector, because the track selector on a Chamberlain is to the left.
Right.
To the right, sorry. To the right. So he's with his right hand playing, and with his left hand he's maneuvering the track selector for some reason. So that's kind of interesting. And the other interesting thing is, you might have heard that it was a mix of strings and brass, what we just heard, the sound that we just heard. And the Chamberlain M series, not the other ones, but the M series, had stereo heads. And they had 8-track tapes. So you could select 6 different combinations of these 8 tracks in stereo, so to say. So you have on your little mixer, if you've selected a position, you had not selected, like on a Mellotron, just one sound. You had selected 2 sounds, where you could actually, with a little volume control mixer on the front panel, you could select how much you wanted of each of the channels, so to say.
Oh, cool. Not quite mixing between the 2 sounds, but actually the volume of each, not mixing between the 2 sounds like on a Mellotron, but the actual volume of each individual sound.
Yeah, you had more control over those individual tracks. On a Mellotron, you really have to just play with the knob to get somewhere in between there, so to say, and it will not be consistent all across the keyboard. On the Chamberlain, it is actually fairly consistent all across the keyboard, and you have it was just a pot where you can just increase or decrease the volume of each individual sound. So that's kind of it's an interesting thing that he development and invention that he basically used, and this was, of course, the Chamberlin was a pro musician. The M1, I should say, the M series of instruments were pro musician instruments, and very appreciated by different musicians in the 70s. And Bowie was one of the few international artists that used it. I know of Three Dog Night that used an M4 Chamberlin, actually, bizarrely enough, on stage, and they were a really big band in the United States. So they toured this M4, and then in the 90s, of course, the Chamberlin was rediscovered by Chris. God, I'm blanking out. Michael Penn, for instance, worked with Amy Mann, and Patrick Warren, who played with on so many sessions. A great guy, very super talented musician, and he worked a lot with Rick Rubin. So Patrick Warren is the one that plays Chamberlin on Johnny Cash stuff and on the Chili Peppers stuff, and he played on so many records in the 90s in LA here, and of course John Bryan is another one that used it on Fiona Apple's records. He used it also on the Magnolia soundtrack and on a bunch of other soundtracks, and just
we should check that
and
out,
this was
too.
and this is in the 90s, of course, where it was still difficult to get high quality sample libraries of Chamberlin and Mellotron sounds, basically.
Right. Right. All of the plugin options that we have didn't really exist either.
No, exactly. So the only really good quality way to get a sound like this was a Mellotron or a Chamberlin, and of course we had started out already back then, so you could get Chamberlin sounds on an M400, and you could get Mellotron sounds on a Chamberlin M1, and because we had collected both of these archives,
right.
We were able to put these sounds into all kinds of tape replay instruments, and that was one of the reasons that these musicians actually were able to use these instruments in the 90s, because in the 80s there was actually no company that was supporting the Mellotrons in particular. The
right.
Chamberlins, to a small extent, the Richard Chamberlin, the son of Harry Chamberlin, was fixing Chamberlins locally in the LA area, but if you were in Germany or in somewhere in Chicago with a 400, there was nobody really supporting it back in those days. But then when we had purchased the whole inventory and the tape, master tapes and all that, we started in 1990 supporting everybody with new tapes and parts and those motor control boards in particular.
Yeah.
So and also with new tape frames. It took just a year or so after I had just done these motor control boards, that Dave ran out of tape frames, and I started making the tape frames also, which makes it possible for people to buy more sounds and expand their library, so to say, without having to find an old tape frame and
right.
ditch the tapes that are in that. So you can basically buy a completely new tape frame, so to say, to use with your M400.
We have in the past, in past episodes we talk about John Bryan's work. We talk about Amy Mann and Fiona Apple in a couple of past episodes. So anybody who hasn't seen those, they're available on our Twitch and our Twitch highlights, and super interesting use of sounds. And we go a little bit more into like where the master tapes overlap and kind of get into some of the details of the the creation of the master tapes in some instances too. Weird things that you can hear in the background and stuff like that. So we're at the end of our hour here. We've had a few people tune in, and thank you so much for tuning in today, everybody. And we're going to continue our conversation about the 400 moving into the digital realm next week, I believe. We're doing more digital stuff. So that was a really good segue. Go ahead.
And I will also talk a little bit about how that Bowie used it in the studio, the 400, between the Ziggy era and the Berlin era. He used it in the studio also, and there's some photos actually of that also. So that will be featured in our next episode.
That sounds great. Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for tuning. Thank you so much for being with us, Marcus. Through Skype this time. And thank you everybody for tuning in. Sorry we were a little late today. We are actually using Skype instead of Zoom because Zoom is down. If you have a work meeting coming up, be warned. Thank you again. And thank you, Marcus. Have a wonderful night. We'll talk to you.
Thank you. Good night. See you.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Have a good weekend.
All right. Thanks.
And goodbye to everybody who's tuned in. If you're in LA, enjoy the weather. If you're not, have a good night if it's nighttime where you are, and we will see you next Friday.